Dr. Jaffe, when dealing with a condition known as subacute endocarditis, I guess it can also be said subacute bacterial endocarditis, can an affected wisdom tooth trigger this type of condition? And how can the LRA be used in this case, and what PERT products would you recommend?
Well, you start with a very specific term, endocarditis. Endocarditis, 98% of the time, is bacterial. Endocarditis means that the surface of a valve in the heart has come unglued. It means that toxins have irritated, pro-oxidative anti-nutrient toxins have irritated the lining cells of the valves of the heart. And this is, again, what is this? It's a spoiler alert. You can only have bacteria in your bloodstream, which is where we're going to go in just a minute. You can only have live bacteria in your bloodstream when your immune defense and repair system is exhausted, is not doing its job. And let me say that as clearly as I can. The only way that you can have any foreign invader, especially a pathogen, especially a bacteria, in the blood and still be alive, means that the billions, 50 billion phagocytic cells, 50 billion wiggly cells, 50 billion granulocytes, basophils, eosinophils, fibroblasts, macrophages, monocytes, etc. Each of those should be able to eat up 50 abnormal bacteria. And bacteria in the bloodstream is abnormal, so they can eat up 50 bacteria when they are energetic, when they are normal. And there's an old-fashioned test that I often recommend to colleagues called the phagocytic index. Labs can do it, and it allows the lab to quantify how many bacteria that person's granulocytes can eat in a certain period of time. And healthy people eat 50 each. 50 times 50 billion is 2.5 trillion foreign invaders at any moment can be neutralized, can be put into what's called the lysosome, which is a recycling organelle, a recycling part of the cell, broken down to their building blocks, which are then beneficial to the remainder of the cell and the body. So now let's just simplify your question, or return to the core of your question. If you have an infected tooth, which a lot of people do, wisdom or other, if you have an infected tooth, and if your immune system is not being restored with ascorbate and polyphenolics, with magnesium and choline citrate, with all the wonderful things that are in PERT LifeGuard and Detoxin Guard, etc. If, heaven forfend, you are not keeping up with those levels of nutrients to the point where your innate immune system is not able to gobble up these bacteria. That's the part that is not taught well in medical school, is not understood well by most clinicians. And so the question becomes a mechanistic, simple one. Should you pull out the tooth if there's any chance that there's an infection? And I'll give you a personal example. I have convinced my dentist that the reason why I have a lucency, which means lack of minerals, in regard to one of my teeth, even though that tooth is very solid at the moment, has to do with how I've been chewing for a while. Another story for another time, but that's the essence of it. And he does the new digital x-rays, which are very low radiation, very high tech, I think, at least contemporary. And we're going to come back in 6 months or a year and see if I can remineralize that with piezoelectric stimulation, chewing in the right way, with his help. So the short answer is yes, if your immune system is exhausted and therefore not able to gobble up the bacteria that come in. And by the way, if you brush your teeth, about 50,000 bacteria, maybe 100,000, get into your body, into your lymphatics, into your bloodstream. And they're quickly eaten up. Otherwise, people would all have infections. Most people have impaired digestion to the point where some bugs, some bacteria, some foreign invaders get to the mucosa, get to the surface of the gut, may even get inside the surface of the gut. And when you follow the LRA by ELISA Act program, or better yet, the entire 8 predictive biomarkers, now the 21st century burdens don't cause your immune system to be so exhausted that it is not able to do its job. And so whether you talk about a wisdom tooth or any other source of infections throughout the digestive tract, there are many opportunities for foreign invaders to get in, and the body has many ways of trapping and recycling them when you give it what it needs, and what it needs are the essentials, and what it doesn't need are the antitoxins. So you want to reduce the burden, and you want to increase the availability of the nutrients, exactly along the lines of what we always talk about. And yes, the LRA test is central to restoring immune defense and repair functions, but it's part of epigenetics, it's part of lifestyle, it's part of the 8 predictive biomarkers interpreted to their best outcome goal values. And when you're at your goal value, you cannot have endocarditis, cannot. Since we're talking about endocarditis, I will mention, because it comes to mind, I was here in Washington, D.C., and a fellow who was the head of infectious disease from Columbia University came down to do a briefing for people here on Capitol Hill. And the subject was called the Andromeda strain. I don't know if you folks remember the book by Michael Crichton, who's actually a physician and quite a fine writer, called the Andromeda strain, but it's basically about a bacteria that's resistant to everything. So you can't kill it. It appears that the Andromeda strain happened at Columbia to an interventional cardiologist, of all things. So they try every antibiotic, and the organism is resistant to every antibiotic. Then they get from Japan a new antibiotic that has not been given to anybody else. It's just been released. Organism was resistant to it. What happened to that hospital room? Because they knew the doctor wasn't going to get out of the hospital room. With all the precautions they could take, when the fellow passed, they basically immolated the room. They basically burned the room. Don't ask how they did that, but it wasn't easy. And he came down to talk about it because he had done it to a colleague of his. So yes, when you walk around with immune systems that are exhausted and dysfunctional, you're part of what I would call the walking worried wounded. Don't do that. So tune up using the biomarkers in the LRA plans so that you're resilient and resistant, so that you repair and keep your immune system able to engulf, break down, and recycle anything infectious. Now, the other part of your question is, what would you do now if you had a client who has bacterial endocarditis? And I don't know what subacute means. I know what the word means. In this context, I don't consider endocarditis subacute. There is a form just before people die where their immune system is totally collapsed, and then there's bazillions of bad bacteria just all over the place. So plus or minus the word subacute, I don't think they mean chronic. I can tell you that endocarditis should be treated, and then you should follow all the suggestions I am making. Now, while the endocarditis is being treated, usually with intravenous antibiotics and other therapies, I'm pretty sure there's going to be none of what I suggested within the standard of care and practice of most institutions. And most people with endocarditis, if you really have endocarditis, you're usually being taken care of in a hospital. So if it is endocarditis, let them be taken care of and cared for well. And then when they want to rebuild, follow the suggestions I made.